Is bioregionalism really the ideal size of like politics and collective decision making? Because I think we've gone on Twitter about this. Like the nation state is like ridiculous, and the nation state was just invented a couple of decades ago, and kind of things. And so, what can we do in terms of collective decision making? Is bioregionalism that? Because it's not. You're connected to the whole planet, if you will, in some ways. But then at the same time, you don't have to take on all the things from all the different places.
There's, I mean, a lot of things to pick up there. I mean, one with like developing countries coming up that are growing really quickly, like India. I mean, so the planet itself, like if the whole world tried to adopt the same energy consumption patterns as the West, like we would just all die.
Literally,
like it's just that's
the book Overshoot, right? Overshoot.
And so if they did, in terms of development, that there is the potential for leapfrog technologies, right? So a common example is like in Africa, they skipped landlines, right? They went straight to zero phones to cell phones, right? And a lot of actually innovation in cell phone technology is happening in like Kenya in terms of like payments and information for farmers and stuff like that.
That's right.
And so you can imagine the up and coming countries like India, it's kind of skipping. I mean, they're already using fossil fuels, but by and large skipping the fossil fuel stage, and moving straight to kind of like whatever nuclear, solar energy, whatever, right? And so there's that. That's just kind of maybe an aside. What was the other part of your question?
Bioregionalism.
Yeah, bioregionalism.
Politics, collective decision making.
I think a more general framework for me is the kind of cosmopolitan localism.
Right.
And so for me, it's like, okay, what are kind of like the most natural scales that are interesting to think about, right? And so like I think the family scale and the village scale are two, and then you think of, but then and so it's both cultural and ecological, and then you think, okay, the watershed scale, because having different different ownership structures or different kind of governance structures in the same watershed is very problematic in terms of ecological coherence, right? And so that's and then up what's higher scale than that? It's bioregional, and what's higher scale than that? I think it's global. So I think those are kind of like, to me, those are kind of like the most important scales. Now the cosmopolitan part comes in is I do think that some problems need to be handled on a planetary scale, right? And but it has to be done. We have to think about it differently than kind of globalism that we understand it today, which is I would say is more of an extractive system, or kind of winner take all kind of system, or a race to the bottom dynamic.
Or I mean, very for me it was top down to bottom up. You know what I mean? Like if we're telling people what to do, then like, I don't know if that's going to work. But then if we allow people the resources and the knowledge and whatever, then they can figure it out themselves, and all of a sudden we're all on the same page.
So on my optimistic days, I think that with new technology, especially communications and new currency type digital currency, like we can kind of piece together some kind of intelligent global system that on the one hand is kind of minimum viable scale, right? So it's kind of from the bottom up, right? Like if you can handle things locally, you handle things locally. But for like ecological flows that are at a bioregional scale, you handle that scale, and planetary the same thing. But that requires kind of these nested levels of kind of coordination, which
I like that.
And a lot of people are working on that, right? Like Gregory Landra, Planetary he's like
Region Network,
exactly, like that kind of stuff. I think is potentially really cool.
Disclaimers: we have Cosmos, so we also have Cosmos. We're in it. We're full in it.
Yeah, exactly. And even someone like Joe Brewer, he talks about creating kind of like he has a platform, right, where he's trying to create this kind of like planetary solidarity framework basically for bioregional regeneration. So he's even kind of like the ecological realist people who are seeing collapse, a lot of them are pursuing this track as well. Of course, in my less optimistic days, I just think that collapse is going to happen, and we're heading back to it's going to be really dark times, right?
Like different pre-industrial kind of stuff.
In my free time, I read about a year ago, I read like Dark Age America by John Michael Greer, right? And it's a very dark picture of where we're headed, right? And so I read dystopian, like near future dystopian fiction as a hobby, right?
So Parable of the Sower is probably the biggest.
I haven't read that one.
Jason Snyder. This is your, so
Yeah.
these two books, Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents.
Yeah.
It's a very, like, because usually people ask me, like, okay, if there's one book to, like, do about what is happening, whatever, people usually go 1984. That's an easy one. Authoritarianism is on the rise, blah, 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 blah.
Right.
Or you go Brave New World.
Yeah.
Aldous Huxley, Soma, everyone's just, like, jazzing themselves to that.
Right.
Or you go this, like, realist thing of, like, okay, ecological degradation has happened, and then what does that mean? Like, to a normal person that's growing up in a place. So just to give you a little, so they're in a tight-knit community, they know how to shoot, like some of these kind of things, and then all of a sudden, but they're constantly effective for raiders, you know, because people who aren't in that community want the stuff that's in that community, and then that's what it seems like, this Mad Max kind of thing. So that's on the recommendations you got to read next.
Okay, I'll take a look at that. But a lot of related literature. You know, I just read for fun, basically. That's amazing. And everything in between. So I kind of where I feel like I'm positioning myself is like, well, you know, in either case, what is a useful activity for me to do now? Well, one is to learn how to grow food in a ecologically sustainable manner. You know, that just seems like pretty important thing to focus on no matter what, you know, no matter which future we're headed towards.
Whatever techno future is there, like that seems like a through line that's going to be there regardless.
I mean, in either case, I don't see industrial agriculture being long for this world. And so like what's, you know, whether it's a highly connected kind of like, new kind of global planetary organism that arises, or whether it's, you know, a much more kind of dark ages Mad Max, or, you know, new neo-feudalist, you know, whatever, you know, post collapse of Roman Empire, which, you know, some people argue was actually pretty great for a lot of people. So, you know,
for maybe the Germans or the barbarians,
for some folks, where it's like, okay, the big brother is finally going off your back, you're kind of left alone, you still have to worry about raiders or whatever, but like it's like a different set of challenges.
It's different.
And so in either case, you know, it's I think, you know, if I can think of like, okay, what's a useful activity, no matter, you know, given this uncertainty, you know, it's learning how to connect to the land. You know.
That's interesting. Cause let me challenge you on one thing. Have you seen the movie Arrival? Okay, so like that's kind of for me the
I don't remember what that.
It was like the best techno optimist kind of thing, because basically that Ted Chiang, the author, he was trying to do what sci-fi writers have not been doing in the last 30 years, and it's all just dystopic stuff. So he wanted not utopic, but more of a better kind of thing, and so. I'm just trying to think of like, is that also in your library, like of those kind of things, or is it really just like more the realist kind of things to kind of get me in the mindset of what I need to do?
Lately, it's been more of the realist stuff. To be honest, I mean, I think I think it's kind of a reaction to, you know, 5 or 10 years ago. I was probably much more interested.
I see. Okay.
In this kind of,
the pendulum is swinging.
And so, you know, I don't know if it'll swing back somewhere, but you know, I just try to, I guess I just try to not fool myself. And like, you know, kind of, and I find that being a little skeptical, you know, even if I err on the side of skepticism, for me, it just seems a little bit more solid grounding to be, right? Like I don't want to fool myself into thinking that, you know, basic things that most of us take for granted, like basic subsistence is always going to be, the supply chains are always going to be delivering food to the supermarkets, you know, stuff that we need, clothing. Like I just don't, you know, I don't want to take that stuff for granted.